God of surprises.
I was talking to Bridget Kenny this week, and she was sharing with her kids this story that we heard in the gospel today about the disciples going to Emmaus. And she said to them, what if you're in Westboro and it's today, so there's not a lot of cars on the road, stores are all shut down, and somebody comes up to you and says, what are you talking about? And they don't seem to know what's been happening in the world in Westboro. You'd be like, how can that be? And yet that's what happened 2,000 years ago with the disciples coming from Jerusalem. Jesus has just died, and they're walking towards Emmaus, which is about 8 miles away, kind of like a little bit beyond Grafton. And Jesus, they don't recognize him, and he's there, and they basically say to him, what happened? And then Jesus explains to them, without revealing himself, all the reasons why it had to happen the way it did. So they eventually get to where they're going. They invite Jesus into their house to have a meal together. And when Jesus raises the bread, just like the Eucharist, all of a sudden the disciples recognize him, and then he disappears. So we have two things we want you to think about for today's video. One is, what helps us to recognize Jesus, and what are things that make it hard to recognize Jesus or God in our lives? And to talk about that with your families. And the second is, God is a God of surprises. So how does God surprise you? How does he surprise me? All right, now we're going to hear from Nan Ford, and she's someone who works in parish outreach, and she's going to share with us how God surprises her every day in her work for St. Luke's.
Hi, I'm Nan. I work in the outreach office, and our office is open to anyone in Westboro, the whole community, who is in need. And so you can imagine lots of people come in, and sometimes they need help with small things, and sometimes, and those are easy, sometimes it's all they need is maybe help with groceries, so we can give them a grocery card. Or sometimes it's a little bit more challenging because I don't have what they need. One day, a family came in of 5, a mom and dad and their 3 children, and they were from a different country, and they hardly even spoke the language. So it was hard, because I don't speak their language either. And I determined that they didn't have a car, they didn't have jobs, they didn't have even the basic necessities. So I asked them if I could go to their home so we could do what we call a home visit and do an assessment. And so they did have an apartment, and I walked into their apartment, and I was shocked. There was not one thing in the apartment, not one thing, except for blankets in a bedroom, in 2 bedrooms. And they had been living there for a month. And so I said, oh my goodness, how am I ever gonna help them? But one thing led to another, and I made some phone calls, and Larry and Patrick, who work at St. Luke's, they brought over the furniture that we had, and some pots and pans, and some lamps and tables, and all of a sudden, by the end of the day, the apartment was furnished. And they had so much gratitude. And they were so surprised. And God had given them that surprise. And the woman, I sat on the sofa at the end of the day, and the woman knelt down in front of me. And she said, just like this morning, I prayed to God that we would not be cold again tonight, and he sent you from the sky. So God surprised her. She never expected it, but that was his surprise, because he's always with us.
So how do we find God's presence today in this world with our pandemic and everything that's happening with us? So we turn to the Wallace family, and we have Hannah and Jack, and they're going to tell us a little bit about how they find God's presence in their everyday life today.
While we are all facing many challenging and difficult times right now, there are still examples and signs that Jesus is among us. For one, people are making masks out of items at their house. Also, people are delivering groceries to the elderly who can't go to the stores themselves.
Sometimes when we're feeling down, we can find signs that Jesus is with us. For example, on our hike today, we found this rock.
Now I want to just share with you a really brief video from a really good friend of mine, Don Wilkins, who's in the choir and he's here often at daily mass. And Don is somebody that when he's driving the car and somebody is looking for $1 or $2 on the side of the road, Don likes to give it to them, but it's always really important to Don that he looks them in the eye and says something like, may God bless you. So let's hear from Don.
Hi, my name's Don, and I'm a member of St. Luke's Parish. I wanted to share something with you this morning. It happened to me a long time ago. I was on my way into work, and I got into a lane for making a left-hand turn with a stoplight up in front. And there were a number of cars in front of me, maybe 3 or 4. And there was a man way up in front, working his way down, asking for help from car to car. It was a very busy corner. Oftentimes there were many people out there seeking help. And so when he got down to me, I rolled down my window and had a couple of dollars I wanted to give him. And I looked up at him, and he looked down at me, and a moment of peacefulness came over me, and I suppose over him too. I just saw and felt the presence of God between us. It was a beautiful moment, and it was probably only lasted a moment, but I gave him the money, and he thanked me and moved on to the car behind me. And I sat there just for a minute, kind of collecting my thoughts. Then the light changed, and we moved on. I never forgot that day or that moment. It sort of reminded me that God is present within each one of us, and the love of Jesus is an example of that love that we can share with one another every day of our lives, with our family members and our friends, and even with those we don't know. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.
In conclusion, I want you to just think for a minute about how now the disciples were leaving Emmaus, coming back. They were joyful. They had purpose. They had felt God's presence. And what a difference that made in their lives today. So let's ask for all of us, that each of us can have that joy, that we can be joyful, that we can find our purpose today, and that we will always feel God's presence and share it with each other. Amen.
Come on, guys, let's put on our spiritual glasses and head out into the world. See you next week.